Why are our governments doing this? Now, our guest, folks have wanted him on for years. I don't know why it's taken so long, as I've read several of his books. Dr. Bill Warner has been a physicist, a businessman, and professor. And I'm not going to go over his whole background, but he is now the director of the Center for the Study of Political Islam. And I've read some of his books, seen some of his talks. It's dead on from just my mainline study of history. But it's not well known by the public. Now, he could go through a whole history treatise with us. You can go to his website and do that or read his books. But I'd like to just get the short and skinny of it, why he thinks the elite is doing this, are doing this, where it's going, who's really in control of Islam right now, why would our elites ally with the most radical form out of Saudi Arabia, the Wahhabi, Sunni group, and how do we counter this and respond to it? Why is the left so in love with it? I mean, you get some college student might have raped a woman, 6 months isn't enough. Okay, fine. But then you got Muslims murdering their wives here in the U.S. and they get light sentences because, oh, it's their culture. What's going on? Why is the establishment so in love with it? So there's a long history of it, but he argues there was no golden age. Like Lord Monckton says, there was some times when Islam, was less destructive than some of the stuff in medieval Europe. Regardless, it's destructive now, and radical Islam is the new Islam, or was the old Islam, and is dominating Islam. So I think the debate is over. So what is the establishment going to do when there's more terror attacks in Europe and the West? Well, we know they're going to take our liberties, saying it's our fault that the Muslims attacked us. And so he joins us now via video Skype, politicalislam.com. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Warner.
Glad to be here.
Okay, we got about 30, 40 minutes here. Try to educate folks, try to educate myself. Give us the Dr. Bill Warner boil down.
Well, first off, everything that Islam does is supremely logical if you understand their logic. And their logic is laid out in the Quran, and it's laid out also in the words of Muhammad. And once you understand who Muhammad is and who Allah is, everything makes sense. The reason it's so confusing is, you see, there's two different Muhammads and two different Qurans. So Islam is based on dualism. It's always got a nice, peaceful side and a jihad side. And this is due to the very nature of who Muhammad was. I'll give you a real brief summary of his life. He preached the religion for 13 years in Mecca and converted 150 Arabs to Islam. They drove him out of Mecca because he brought in dissension. Sound familiar? And he went to Medina, where he became a jihadist and a politician. He had 100 acts of jihad in the last 9 years of his life. Not 101, not 99, but 100. But when he died, every Arab was a Muslim. So here, what do we have? We have a peaceful preacher, Muhammad, and then we have a vicious jihadist. But who was successful? It was the jihad that was successful, and it was the politics that was successful. So this dualistic nature of Muhammad is reflected in the Quran. And so this is why you hear people say, oh, no, Islam is the religion of peace. Well, yes, it is, but it's the politics of jihad. So this dualism allows Islam to always come off exactly how it needs to be. Nice for the nice people and not nice for the not nice people. So that's sort of the doctrine is at the basis of the confusion.
Fundamentally deceptive. Break it down for us more.
Yes. As a matter of fact, there are many hadith which advocate deception. Who will kill Ashraf, who has offended Allah and his prophet? This is a hadith. I will, Muhammad, but I will need to deceive him. May I do so? Yes, deceive him. Now, these are the words of Muhammad, so these are doctrinal words. There are 12 verses in the Quran which say that a Muslim is never the true friend of a kafir. I'm a kafir, and I suspect you are too. So here we have, you can be friendly, but you're not actually a friend. So this is, once again, the threat of deception. But it also explains why we see that we have vicious jihadists, and then we have Ahmed, who works down at the fruit market, is a nice kind of guy. Which one's the real Muslim? Yes, they're both real Muslims.
You've got the floor.
Okay. So now, why is all this so hard to understand? Because what has happened is that our intellectual class, the universities, have decided to abandon reason and instead become politically correct. One of the greatest tragedies we have in our culture today is the fact that, well, let me give you an example. I gave a talk in North Carolina, and a president of a local community college said, this man is unbalanced, maybe, but he should never be allowed to speak. what do we have here? We have the president of a college saying that ideas should not be debated, but instead should just be suppressed. So this is what our root problem is we're giving up what is the cornerstone of our civilization, which is critical thought. I mean, Alex, once we throw our critical thought out and we have nothing in the world but ideological propaganda, we're already in the sluice. So our big problem is we've given up rational thought. But my guess, this is no news to you.
And all over the world, they are banning so-called liberal democracies like Germany, even criticizing open borders, or saying mild things about controlling. So at a certain point, I agree that the politically correct are ignorant at the grassroots level, but above it, there's a more sinister plan.
Well, I think that power, everyone loves power, and the left has certainly taken over the universities and also the media. But now, you know, I don't just blame the left for taking over. I also blame the conservatives for having given up. I live in Nashville, Tennessee, which is a very religious town and fairly conservative, although not as much as the surrounding states. And there's no real cry for the ending of censorship. That is, the conservatives are not raising enough hell, Alex, just to put it bluntly, nor are the Christians. We're all being a little too nice. The cancer of nice is killing us, man.
Well, you look at the PNAC documents that are from so-called conservatives, and Dick Cheney and others write about we need a big Pearl Harbor event, catalyzing event, and then we can go in and basically have a clash of civilizations and control the grand chessboard. That's actually a Zbigniew Brzezinski idea of occupying the Middle East, not to reform it, but to then control the crossroads of Europe and Asia and control Russia and China. But regardless, they've only started up and are now allied with the more radical elements. How does Saudi Arabia feed into all this?
Interesting question. Let me give you an example. You've heard of Chechnya?
Yes.
Well, the Chechen jihadists are the most vicious. They are the supreme jihadists. Now then, you need to understand that Chechnya used to be a Sufi-based kind of Islam. That is, singing, dancing, sort of the loving side of Islam. Well, Islam came in the form of Wahhabism with Islamic money, in particular Saudi money, and now then the Chechens have become vicious jihadists. This effect is being seen in places like Malaysia, where Saudi Arabia moved into. In Malaysia, you had a Hindu form of Islam. That is, there was a Hindu culture there, and the Islam had not penetrated down to destroy all the Hinduism. But now then, with Wahhabi money coming in, we see now in Malaysia, the rise of a more vicious kind of Islam. So what is happening is that the Wahhabis in Saudi Arabia have infinite sums of money. You must surely know that Saudi Arabia is spending more money to Islamicize the world. 80% of the mosques in America are built by the Saudis than the Soviet Union did at the height of the Cold War.
So we're in a war with a militarized system that uses a religion as its cult control system, and it is proselytizing and radicalizing all other forms of Islam around the world and successfully taking over all the way down into Central Africa and Western Africa and Eastern Africa, all the way as far east as Indonesia. I mean, this is massive, with our own governments bringing them in mass.
Oh, well, I don't think our government is resisting Islam anything at all. As a person who speaks to the subject of Islam, let me tell you what happens to those who do. I'm called a racist, a bigot, a hater, and Islamophobe. You're probably called the same thing. What's interesting about this verbiage is it never says, well, now, Bill, you know, when you say there's two different Muhammads, a religious preacher and a violent jihadist, you're wrong. No. They say that I am a bad person because I bring these facts up. So once again, we've lost the ability to reason together.
Sure, you're not supposed to quote Muhammad, who within, his life took over an entire region. And then within 100 years of his death, I mean, let's go over some of the history when we come back from break here of the expansion of Islam. Because we hear it's this religion of peace. The Pope has come out and said that he's very troubled about saying Europe's Christian, that he, what's the word, abhors it? What's the exact word? He dreads the Christian nature of Europe. I mean, wow, is the new Pope, is he actually an ambassador of Saudi Arabia now?
Well, I'm afraid the Pope does not seem to demonstrate any knowledge of Islam. He may have some, but he certainly doesn't demonstrate it. He just attended a meeting with a Grand Imam from Al-Azhar University, and the two of them came out with we're going to give peace a chance. You could just hear John Lennon in the background. And that the true nature of Islam is all about peace. And so they're going to...
When it was Islam that destroyed the last Christian seat of the old world in Constantinople, folks may have heard of it. It's now called Istanbul. We'll be back. There's a lot of different university maps out there, but you can just Google Islam Today, map of the world, or you can also look at a group of maps, Islam over time and its spread, and Europe almost collapsed. But when you go to college, you're taught that Europe invaded, and there's all these movies made by Hollywood where Europe invaded the Middle East for no reason. They were bad and they were horrible. Look, Europe did all sorts of barbarous stuff, but this is the place where the Renaissance came from. Everybody wants to come here because we created the modern world. And I see it as a form of cuckolding or suicide of the West to just bring in the most radical of these people and then say we have to submit to them. We're talking to Dr. Bill Warner of politicalislam.com, highly requested. Obviously, and I've read some of his books, seen his work. It's all spot on for my research, but he just lays it all out and gets demonized for it. This is a fact. So let's talk about the history of it some, sir. And this is a short segment, long segment coming up. The boil down of how it's expanded and where you see it going.
Well, the expansion started with Muhammad. Remember, he was in Mecca, then he went to Medina. This movement from Mecca to Medina is called the Hijrah. That is the migration. The Islamic calendar is based upon the Hijrah. Why? Because it was migration that brought Islam its success. Now, fast forward 1,400 years, and what's happening in Europe? We have a new Hijrah. We have a new migration. And it's important to know that Hijrah is a form of jihad. Now, then, I don't doubt but what there's some of these so-called, quote, Syrian refugees who are actually economic migrants, and they're not jihadists. But nevertheless, we do have to understand that Islam has a doctrine of jihad that is based upon migration. And as soon as Muhammad died, Islam started bursting out of the Middle East, took over the Middle East. And let's stop right here and deal with the question. The Crusades, as we're taught in the West, is they were an evil act by evil Christians who were going to invade the pure land of Islam, the Middle East, and do bad things. Hello. Before Muhammad, the Middle East was Christian. It was Islam that invaded the Christian lands of the Middle East, not the European knights of the Crusades. So somehow or another, we've managed to get all of this history turned inside out. But it was the case that the Crusades were a defensive move, trying to reclaim the Middle East for Christians. Now, it succeeded only in part, but nevertheless, its intent was reestablishing what was originally there in the Middle East anyway, which was a Christian nation, or a series of nations. I mean, Iraq used to be Christian. North Africa was Christian. Egypt was Christian. Turkey was Christian. Even Persia was half Christian. But this is all gone under the jihad and the migration of Islam. So I think we need to reacquaint ourselves with our history. And when I say our history, I'm saying that the history of Europe is also the same as the history of the United States, and even in a strange way, the history of Japan and others. Because I'm talking about a meta-civilization here, not just a European civilization, but a civilization based on two critical points. One, the ethical principle of the Golden Rule, or unitary ethics, and the second is the intellectual principle of critical thought. Because that's what our civilization is based on, and it's not just ours, but others. It's important to know that Islam denies the Golden Rule because it doesn't have one. It creates Kafirs and Muslims, which is not a unified view of humanity. So these are all some elements of history which unfortunately seem to be lost upon our current scholars in the universities.
And of course, we have this whole Wahhabist system that was one of the most radical forms ever that, from my research, correct me if I'm wrong, was basically based on the slave trade and robbing caravans. And then that somehow got linked up with British intelligence in 1900. They gave it funding to make that the brand of Islam around the Middle East. What an insane program.
And by the way, let me challenge you on the use of one word here. The Wahhabis are not extremist or radical.
They are the original then. You're saying they're the real deal.
Oh, no, they're the real deal. They're the 24 karat. The same with Islamic State.
So I'm using a politically correct term when I say radical Islam. The truth is bona fide original jihad Islam.
Dyed in the wool. Dyed in the wool.
Orthodox.
Yeah, orthodox. Exactly. Islamic State is pure orthodoxy. The Wahhabis are pure orthodoxy. everything they do and say, look, Islamic State goes through a lot of trouble